No matter how completely the virus and germ hypotheses have been dissected and systematically refuted over the past 4 years, there is a recurrent protest that we see being put forward in the form of, but what about the biolabs? We have continued to address the various aspects of this question, and in June 2021 published gain-of-function gaslighting, followed by gain-of-function garbage in January 2022, as well as bioweapon BS later that year. Dr. Stefan Lanka spoke about the myth of bioweapons and some of the historical aspects in 2021. Mike Stone of Virology has written articles on gain of fiction, while Tom Cowan and Michael Bryant have exposed the preposterous tale that anything was on the loose in northern Italy or New York in 2020. However, the bioweapon narrative continues to seduce those who haven't realised that the foundational evidence is based in pseudoscience.
When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are. Anything your heart desires will come to you.
There will be figureheads who appear to be on the side of truth, questioning the natural existence of SARS-CoV-2, challenging the safety of the vaccines, promoting alternative therapies, etc., who will also continue to push the idea that viruses exist and can be manipulated in a lab. These people are the Pied Pipers, leading those who are going astray back into the fold. There is no need to create a virus bioweapon when all that was needed to control the masses is a PCR test and some well-designed propaganda. Mike Stone, Virology.
Already at the beginning of the corona crisis, rumours circulated very quickly that the alleged new coronavirus was not of natural origin, but came from a bioweapons laboratory. Of course, China was first accused of having developed the virus. Later, the USA was accused, and then China again. And at some point in between, the French scientist Luc Montagnier, who was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2008 for the alleged proof of the HIV virus, among others, spoke out. He claimed that the virus was definitely of artificial origin because it had genetic similarities to the alleged HIV virus. Most of these theories were dismissed after some time, and many scientists declared that there was no reason to assume that the alleged SARS-CoV-2 was a bioweapon. In January 2021, however, the rumour of the Wuhan virus flared up again when an international group of researchers claimed to have found new evidence that strengthened the suspicion of the bioweapon. The scientists' conclusions sounded alarming, but were also based only on suspected elements in the alleged genetic strand of SARS-CoV-2. These observations immediately lose their significance, and above all their threatening nature, when one realises that this same genetic genome strand of the alleged SARS-CoV-2 is in any case only a man-made theoretical construct. No wonder then that some of it looks artificial and man-made. One could say SARS-CoV-2 did indeed originate in a laboratory in Wuhan, but not in the way many people believe. The genetic material of SARS-CoV-2 comes from a computer and has never left it. It is a theoretical mental construct. The ideas of pathogens made in laboratories are all scientifically untenable. Moreover, they even contradict principles of biology that have been known for many, many years. It's irrelevant whether they're supposed to be killer bacteria or killer viruses. The Russians, for example, completely abandoned their bioweapons development in the 1970s because they realized that the concept of pathogens as weapons does not work. But the claim that dangerous bioweapons exist is very effective in order to create fear. First and foremost, of course, it's effective in populations who are panic-stricken about contagion.
One of the recurrent themes in bioweapon mythology is that its proponents start with premises such as A. Viruses have been shown to exist, and B. Pathogens have been shown to exist. Then they want to run away with their arguments about suspicious genetic sequences, furin cleavage sites, patents involving, quote, viruses, so-called leaked documents or emails, and other items they present as alleged smoking guns. We continue to remind them that before they develop these various stories, they need to show that the foundational premises on which they are based are in fact sound. Wikipedia states that biological warfare, also known as germ warfare, is the use of biological toxins or infectious agents such as bacteria, viruses, insects, and fungi with the intent to kill, harm, or incapacitate humans, animals, or plants as an act of war. Biological weapons, often termed bioweapons, biological threat agents, or bioagents, are living organisms or replicating entities, i.e. viruses, which are not universally considered alive. This is a very specific definition, and it involves the concept of alleged pathogenic and contagious microorganisms, whether they have been shown to exist, such as bacteria, or not shown to exist, such as viruses. Note also the mention of biological toxins. By definition, this is a poisonous substance that is a specific product of the metabolic activities of a living organism and is usually very unstable, notably toxic when introduced into the tissues, and typically capable of inducing antibody formation. Toxins do not spread from person to person. They include bee stings, snake venom, and box jellyfish stings. Ricin is also a toxin that is found in the seeds of the castor oil plant. Although substances such as ricin were concentrated and investigated for use as weapons in both world wars, they are nowhere near as toxic as chemical compounds such as sarin.
Test animals whose resistance to GB is comparable to or slightly higher than man's were placed in targets of varying hardness. Targets included a sandbagged machine gun position, a two-man covered foxhole, a hasty fortification, and a concrete command post bunker. On command, all 6 pieces were fired. Within 15 seconds, 75 pounds of GB had been dispersed. These scenes were filmed simultaneously by remote control cameras in each separate location, and have been shortened to conserve the running time of the film. The animals in the machine gun position were the first to be affected. Although protected from blast and shell fragments, by the time the smoke and dust had cleared away, the pigeon in the foreground was dead from the effects of the nerve gas. Less than 40 seconds had elapsed. The pigeon in the two-man foxhole also has died in less than 40 seconds. The rabbit and goat showed symptoms in less than a minute and were dead in less than 4 minutes. The animals in the hasty bunker began to react to the GB in less than 2 minutes and were dead within 3 minutes. The goat in the machine gun position has now expired. It is less than 3 minutes since the shells landed. The effects of the nerve gas on the 2 goats in the command post bunker were evident in less than 2 minutes. All the animals were killed by the toxic chemical within 4 minutes after the GB shells landed in the target area. These tests demonstrated how quickly lethal concentrations of GB nerve gas can penetrate hard targets and fortifications of the type that normally provide considerable protection from high explosives.
In short, biological toxins have far less potential to be weaponized than readily made chemicals. As stated in their very definition, such toxins tend to be unstable and prone to breaking down quickly. Compared to synthetic chemicals that can infiltrate our bodies through inhalation or mere contact, most biological toxins need to be injected, such as snake venom, or ingested in a significant quantity, such as some varieties of mushrooms. Nature would have it no other way. That leaves the specific category of alleged bioweapons, such as microorganisms or insects. However, even with insects, it all comes down to the supposed pathogenic microbes that they are said to transmit. You can watch my other videos on this topic, including the Lyme disease lie, which expose the pseudoscience behind these claims. Each time an individual comes to understand that all facets of the official narrative of COVID are a fiction, that there was no pandemic and no novel virus and no lab leak, the world moves a step further from the lies and a step closer to the truth. Health Freedom Defence Fund. In the COVID-19 era, the bioweapon proponents typically make the claim that an engineered coronavirus, or at least a replicating entity, leaked from a laboratory or was intentionally released and then went on to cause a pandemic. Every day, more people are coming to the conclusion that there was no pandemic. And in our books, such as Virus Mania and The Final Pandemic, we detail why, quote, infectious disease pandemics are not even biologically possible. Even on their own terms, the pandemic promoters are left with their alleged laboratory virus that was carefully engineered to kill frail elderly people and those with significant underlying morbidity. At this point, we always ask them how COVID-19 is even a legitimate disease and how is it supposed to be diagnosed. In 2020, I published What is a COVID-19 Case, which created a lot of attention before YouTube suddenly took it down. In the video, we pointed out the absurdity of the official case definition. Because there were no specific symptoms or signs, it all hinged on the result of a molecular detection assay. The claims that people were diagnosing a new disease in 2020 is preposterous, because if they're saying it was COVID-19, it falls straight back into circular reasoning. Like the WHO, they are simply making it up as they go. To all of us that pointed out there was no virus in 2020, it was clear that the main reason people bought into it were the fear campaigns. It was also obvious that the lab leak story was being planted in the early stages. For example, in February 2020, the Daily Mail ran the headline, "Did coronavirus originate in Chinese government laboratory? Scientists believe killer disease may have begun in research facility 300 yards from Wuhan wet fish market." But shh, they don't want the public to know about the story, which was shared over 150,000 times. Note how this article has been allowed to feature across social media platforms for over 4 years, and yet my 2020 video that discussed the official definition of COVID-19 was banned long ago. Let's have a look at some of the highlights of the Mail's lab leak story. It stated, "A new bombshell paper from the Beijing-sponsored South China University of Technology says the Wuhan Center for Disease Control could have spawned the contagion in Hubei province." Wow, how lucky for us that the Chinese government sponsored the paper and then it was released to the world. The article goes on to state, one of the researchers at the WHCDC described quarantining himself for 2 weeks after a bat's blood got on his skin, according to the report. That same man also quarantined himself after a bat urinated on him. Then we get to a photo with the caption, "Workers in protective gear carry a bag containing a giant salamander that was reported to have escaped from the Huanan seafood market in Wuhan in central China's Hubei province in January." It's always a good idea to call it in when you see a salamander making a run for it. And then, of course, comes the incriminating evidence, proving the pandemic is real and it probably came from a lab. This diagram showing that the distance between the alleged outbreak in the Huanan seafood market and the Wuhan CDC is 277.73 meters. In 2020, there were numerous stories along these lines, including some featuring the Wuhan Institute of Virology, showcasing dozens of samples said to contain coronaviruses. We hope that these stories are increasingly seen for what they are. We must remember that in 2020, far more people were terrified that a deadly disease might be on its way to their neighbourhood due to the media broadcasting pandemic around the clock. Since the opening act, the lab leak and biolab stories have freely circulated, and it's odd that the lab leak super sleuths aren't a little concerned that the mainstream media is happy to promote the alleged cover-up. To keep the public in a state of fear, the narratives became even more spectacular in 2021, with a Daily Mail headline stating, China was preparing for a third world war with biological weapons, including coronavirus. 6 years ago, according to dossier produced by the People's Liberation Army in 2015 and uncovered by the US State Department. Don't worry about looking at the foundational science when it comes to whether biological weapons are even a thing. Just get the Chinese PLA to produce a, quote, bombshell document titled New Species of Man-Made Viruses as Genetic Bioweapons, which is then, quote, accessed by the US State Department and then slipped out to the whole world. Large news platform The Australian, ultimately owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, reported that Robert Potter, a digital forensic specialist who has worked for the US, Australian and Canadian governments and has previously analysed leaked Chinese government documents, verified the authenticity of the paper. There is concern about the high-risk nature of the biological research into coronaviruses Wuhan scientists were conducting, particularly involving gain-of-function research, where virologists create new viruses that are more transmissible and more lethal. In the article, there is no attempt to analyse the plausibility of the scientific material that is being discussed, including gain-of-function research on imaginary viruses. What is also notable about the story is that it is written by Shari Markson, and it just so happened to be promoting her new book, What Really Happened in Wuhan. In other words, a mainstream marketing funnel with a call to action. Markson's glowing Wikipedia page and promotions by the international corporate media is also a major red flag when it comes to COVID-19. With Wikipedia's positive coverage, she is in the company of Jeffrey Sachs, who has also been heavily promoted with regard to his lab leak narrative. I'm not saying that Shari Markson is intentionally deceiving people, but once again, such authors take all of virology's claims at face value. They think that viruses and pathogenic entities exist because someone else said so.
But anyone who knows a bit about biochemistry can see that the genome of SARS-CoV-2 really does look very bumpy. And this is exactly the argument of the people who claim that the virus must have come from a laboratory and must therefore be a bioweapon. Of course, this then circulates on the internet again and fuels people's primal fear of infection and of viruses. Therefore, anyone who claims such a thing has to be asked the question, where has a virus ever been isolated? Where? Show me a relevant publication and show me the exact passages in which this is described. Show me where this is described in the methods section of any scientific paper. These are only very short paragraphs, and if it cannot be shown, it must be rejected, because it spreads unnecessary and dangerous fear. Fear is always dangerous. Spreading fear is not justifiable. The theory that there are pathogens and transmissible diseases has been perpetuated to the present day with this kind of assertion. But if you go into detail, you immediately see that none of this is tenable. What one could say perhaps at this point is, what was done again and again in the so-called Middle Ages, or actually in all wars, is to make survival impossible for the enemy and also for the civilian population. By destroying the crops, destroying the fields, killing the animals so that simply scorched earth remains, and by throwing carcasses into the wells. Then the water was heavily polluted with decomposing products of the proteins, that is, with nitrates.
At this point, we should also give an honorary mention to one of the first COVID narratives out of the gate. That was the snakebug headline in January 2020, featuring patient in capsule. It used words such as World War Flu and Deadly Flu and prepped the public with the word lockdown. In the small print, we can see that Imperial College's Neil Ferguson has invented a fictional 2% fatality rate for the fictional disease. And incredibly, they report that scientists are already working on a vaccine. To top off the spectacle, the article also displayed a world map and was framed by 2 biohazard symbols. As a little segue, this symbol was introduced in the 1960s by the Dow Chemical Company. The designer later said, "We wanted something that was memorable but meaningless, so we could educate people as to what it means." Memorable but meaningless to educate people. Ironically poetic, and perhaps the essence of the COVID show. The virus model has been refuted, and more widely it is evident that pathogens do not exist because microbes such as bacteria have no capacity to cause disease in healthy tissue. So manipulation of imaginary concepts means that they are still imaginary concepts. You may see an argument put forward that there are infectious proteins or that shedding in the vaccinated can affect nearby people. This falls back into the prion hypothesis, the most famous of which is BSC in cattle and Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans. As we outlined in Virus Mania, despite Stanley Prusiner winning a Nobel Prize in 1997 for allegedly discovering prions, the model remains pure speculation. The uncontrolled animal experiments involved injecting foreign material directly into their brains and then claiming that the appearance of plaques means that a prion was transmitted. As Alan Ebringer stated in 1998, the prion research workers do something that is not allowed. They inject brain tissue homogenates into experimental animals, and when neurological symptoms appear, they say they have transmitted BSE. However, they have done nothing of the sort, because what they are doing is producing experimental allergic encephalomyelitis, EAE. I think all prion experiments involve production of EAE and not transmission of BSE. In recent times, we've also seen some virological sidestepping with a reboot of imagined subviral particles, such as viroids, naked RNA particles that are claimed to be infectious. The idea was put forward in the 1970s, and despite never being shown to have any pathogenic effects in nature, in the virologists' minds, they work a little something like this.
And it goes a little something like this.
And in recent months, the genomics mavens have found that if you continue to ignore the crucial sequence provenance issue, you can pump up the volume on computational metatranscriptomics and give birth to obelisks.
I'm so confused right now. My neon unicorn had a baby? You're free to go now. Okay, thank you so much, doctor. No problem, have fun with your new family member. Oh my god, I will. I can't believe this, guys. Look at it. Unicorn had a baby.
Some apparent health freedom advocates who have captured the attention of huge audiences are, wittingly or not, doing the bidding of the biosecurity state. By maintaining and heightening the fear factor of the gain-of-function boogeyman, these influencers are creating fertile ground for future psychological terror campaigns. Health Freedom Defence Fund. In the COVID era, we witnessed the blatant propaganda of a staged pandemic that had no basis in biological reality. It was the fear-based element that caused most of the world to accept the narrative and then comply with the preposterous lockdowns, infringements on civil rights, and then multiple injections. As if that wasn't bad enough, it was also used as a front to prolong the inevitable collapse of many fiat-based financial systems, as well as allow the transfer of vast amounts of wealth from hapless populations to select corporations and globalist organisations. The bioweapon gaslight keeps those that are questioning parts of the narrative from leaving the plantation completely. Even if they don't believe the quote official narrative, they still engage in anti-scientific thinking and ignore the stack of evidence that clearly refutes the entire concept of contagion. It is also unclear where alleged freedom fighters think their bioweapon expose narratives will lead. Do they think they or their allies will be in charge of the policing of alleged bioweapons? No, that fictional task will be accepted as real and gladly taken up by governments and their friends as they eagerly tighten the screws on the biosecurity surveillance state. We would say, be careful what you wish for, or you'll end up with ever-encroaching biosecurity acts, like New Zealand has since 1993. They award themselves all sorts of powers to do invasive things to people and property, with clauses that can be easily modified and interpreted for nefarious purposes. So when someone claims that bioweapons exist, ask them to go beyond the sales pamphlets and tales about blankets being used to spread the smallpox, quote, virus. requests that they point us to a controlled scientific study that demonstrates the existence of replicating and contagious disease-causing entities. When they fail to produce any, ask why they are propagating a narrative that serves the pandemic industry and the powers that shouldn't be. As we wrote in The Final Pandemic, when the cracks in the facade of virology, germ theory, or the medical system are first seen, there can appear to be a void and a sense that something needs to replace it. However, as so much of it is an artificial construct, there should really be a feeling of relief because nothing is required to replace such nonsense. There are plenty of things you can do to improve your health, but worrying about imagined bioweapons is not one of them. Let's continue to help as many people as we can move beyond these fears so they can fully understand their harmony with nature and achieve true health. If you enjoyed this video, please visit supportdrsam.com